did you always want to be an investor?
And I'm delighted to answer the question, Steve. Thank you for having me here. Please don't be stressed. Yes, William does prepare a lot. I prepare when I have to interview somebody a lot less. And so let's all relax and have fun. And did I always want to be an investor? The answer is no. I didn't really know what investing was. The first time I came across investing was my father driving me to or from school in Iran, where he had figured out that he could buy stocks and shares, and he was sending orders in to the banker where he'd opened a bank account in Switzerland, and he would ask me to look up the price. I remember we'd get something like the International Herald Tribune, and I'd look up the price of, for example, IBM, and he'd get all excited if it had gone up, and he'd get all unhappy if it had gone down. And I didn't really think about investing until, I would say, for me, age 26, 27.
Oh, really? That's quite late.
And what had happened to me is that I was absolutely infected with this idea of efficient markets. So why would anybody become an investor? Because if the markets are efficient, there's no real input there. And so up to then, I didn't really think about it as something for me to do. Investors were just people who were out there who were providing capital for reinvestment. The only thing that I did cotton on to early on was that around the same time that my father was asking me about shares, and I remember he specifically asked me about IBM, but there were probably others as well, he got an HP 12C calculator. And I used to love sitting and playing with financial functions. And, I'd love to recreate, I'd love to have a camera on me because I remember sort of looking at different percentage rates of return and knowing that my father had money to invest, and asking myself what would happen if you had this percentage rate of return for X amount of years, and pressing the FV, future value button, and discovering, that was when I discovered the miracle of compound interest. I mean, it just blew me away when I thought about how my father's money could grow. But then I didn't think about it for another decade and a half. I mean, I would have been like 10 years old when that happened.
And you grew up in Iran?
It's a complicated story. We came to Iran as a family in 1970 when my father took a job with a multinational chemicals company. And so I did part of my growing up in Iran from 1970 to 77 before we moved as a family to the UK.
Oh, right. So, and what was Iran like?
It was amazing. It really was. It is a beautiful place. I have such positive memories of Iran. I learned to ski there. There are colors in Iran that I can't wait to see again. There's a kind of a blue that you get in blue glass. I guess there's a lapis lazuli is what they call it. But pomegranates in autumn, just an amazing place, amazing people. And I've not been able to go back since the revolution, and would not go back because we were heavily associated with the Israeli embassy. And so until there's a new government in Iran, I would not even think about going there. But the minute there is, I'll go there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, no, it's a place I've always fancied going to. And there have been a few frontier investors who've gone out, bought some very cheap stocks, only to find that they've got quite a lot cheaper. But I was interested that you believed in the efficient market hypothesis. And you had this like amazing economics tutor, Peter Sinclair, who's regarded like one of the top academics. I mean, he's taught people like Tim Harford, Deanne Coyle, Camilla Cavendish, and he also taught David Cameron, who was one of your contemporaries. So look, did he just indoctrinate you that you believed this?
First of all, Peter Sinclair is, they say that your teachers become like your parents. And he became like a parent to me. He changed my life. I was an unhappy law student, and he made it possible for me to switch subjects. So it was and so he really is like a father figure to me, became a friend, and it's very tragic that he passed away early in COVID. He was quite overweight, and I reconnected with all of those people actually through the memorial service that was held for him. I wouldn't say that Peter was not an indoctrinating type at all. He was just very excited to see somebody who's enthusiastic about his subject. And he was a classical academic economist and got excited about great ideas. And the efficient market hypothesis and something that was very prevalent at the time, rational expectations, which is an assumption that economists made to make their models work, just made it so elegant. And so you would get excited about the elegance of the idea. And I think that I just have a mind that loves those things. I mean, I think perhaps we all do. We love elegant ideas, and sometimes elegant ideas do explain the world, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes the world is very, very messy.
Well, the investing world usually is quite messy, right?
And and it's interesting. So years later, I've kind of discovered what some people call chaos theory, or this idea that systems in biology, for example, are far better explanators of the economy. And I came to Peter and I said, there's a better word than chaos theory for it, because it doesn't capture all of it. It's complex adaptive systems is a better word for it. And this guy, Michael Mauboussin, whom you should interview, is at the Santa Fe Institute, where there's a lot of research done into this. And I come to Peter and I say, Peter, all of these biological systems and complex adaptive systems are a much better way of modeling human behavior, don't you think? He said, yeah. And he said, the problem is that you either have to do text descriptions, or the mathematics is just too complex and complicated to make any predictions. And so, and in a sense, I've started reading economics again, in part to kind of honor Peter Sinclair and to honor a career path that I didn't take. Economists get excited about taking the complex world and turning it into a simple model, and often those models are super useful. But sometimes we get carried away, and the efficient market hypothesis was certainly a place in which many of us got carried away. And
what was it like? So you were a contemporary of David Cameron, our former prime minister at Oxford, and you were a contemporary of Chris Hahn and Bill Ackman at Harvard, two highly successful hedge fund managers, both billionaires. I mean, you're a pretty successful guy, you're pretty wealthy, but I was wondering, is it difficult to be satisfied when you compare yourself with billionaires and prime ministers? And did studying with these guys, did that raise your game at university? And does having peers like them make you continue to raise your game?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. So, you become like the people you hang out with. And so those are some of the people that I hung out with early in my life. Just to give you a little more color, thanks to Peter Sinclair, I participate. He from time to time would put 3 or 4 or 5 students together. So normally a tutorial was 2 students, one of them reading out an essay and one of them handing it in. And he put sort of 4 or 5 students together. So I shared, I don't know how many sessions with David Cameron. And this was in probably what was my 3rd year at Oxford, but my 1st year studying economics. And it would have been in his 2nd year studying economics. And I mean, I was at the time floored, as in on the floor, by his capacity for self-expression, elegant self-expression, his understanding of the underlying concepts, and the confidence, but also the humility with which he expressed them. I mean, I came to Oxford ill-prepared for what it was, and was kind of racing to catch up for pretty much all of the 4 years that I was there. So that's David. And then I really had zero contact with him. I mean, our paths did not cross in any way, shape, or form. In the case of Bill and Chris, I did spend quite a bit of time with him at Harvard Business School, and quite a bit of time with him in the year 2 or 3 afterwards. But he moved to London. He was in New York and Boston for a while, but then he moved to London. He regularly asked me if I was coming back, and I kind of wanted to stay in New York. And so I did not see him as much, and I would say that I see him now maybe for a coffee in his office once every year or 2. And but he's always very kind and gives me the time of day in his office. I mean, he was always as intense as I think the people who experience him today.
He couldn't have been that intense when he was young, surely.
He was extremely intense and unbelievably focused. And so I don't think at the time that I quite understood the intensity and the focus. And then Bill Ackman, I mean, so I can't say that I'm directly friends with Bill Ackman, but we share a friend in this Whitney Tilson, who sees him a lot. And he's, my experience with Bill the times that I've been in the same room as him and the stories that I've heard from people one step removed is that he's an extraordinarily generous guy. I don't think people quite realize how extraordinarily generous he is. I mean, I know people who've shown up in his office to just try and talk to him about some charitable organization. They walk out with a substantial check. I don't know if he still does that, so please don't go and quote that to Bill and expect him to write you a check.
Also, listeners, don't go to Bill's office in Columbus Circle and disturb him.
But he's an extraordinarily generous guy, and he's been extraordinarily generous with me. Actually, when I started getting interested in investing, I came to his office it was close to, or perhaps in, the Bear Stearns building, 237 Park Avenue. And he just said, "Oh, just come use the Bloomberg outside. You can't come into the inner sanctuary, but feel free to." And that was like wonderful for me. I was so extraordinarily grateful for it. And so those are my interactions. It's not any kind of deep friendship with any of them. Not even. It's kind of like they know who I am, but not a lot more. And I would say that, yeah, I think that especially living in New York, it's not that I asked myself to ask the question, but the question just arose in my mind. And especially to the extent that I was friends with Chris and spent a lot of time with him. So the question arises, or it even arose at a time when I was sort of like doing fundraising rounds or going on beauty contests in places like Geneva. And the bankers would say, first of all, they'd doubt that I had known Chris Hahn at all. And then they'd say, well, why aren't you doing what he's doing? Or why aren't your returns the way his returns are? And I think that I struggled with it for a while and I struggled it as well with Warren Buffett. I mean, I literally, when I came across Warren Buffett, I had the arrogance to think that maybe I was smart as Warren Buffett. I was capable of putting out the same returns as Warren Buffett. Like, I think, a bunch of other people. I'm not alone in that. And it was hard for me to realize that I was not. And I guess the only appropriate place to go is to realize that you're on your own path. And there are many, many things that come together to generate outlying success. And you should be happy with the success that you can generate. We will never, ever know what combination of things came together in, say, Chris and Bill to develop the results. They may not know themselves. And there's certainly skill and hard work plays a part. Luck also plays a part, and they come together in an unusual way. And there's a kind of like an increase in wisdom that comes from realizing that it's actually not important to be the most outlying outlier. And it's funny because I have conversations with my children who, you know, obviously, like any human, want to say that they own their intelligence. This is mine, you know? And I kind of say, well, no, actually, it's not yours. You happen to inherit the genes that you inherited because you won an ovarian lottery, or you maybe didn't win it. You got your particular ticket in the ovarian lottery, and you were born with a particular set of genes in a particular family in particular circumstances. And all that has come together to make you, you. And so we should have a little more humility for people or you should have a little more humility around people who may be not as smart, not as motivated, not as a whole bunch of things. So I think that that's an important step on the path to wisdom. But you're absolutely right, though, that it was bugging me enough that it helped me to take the decision to leave New York. And it's far easier to say those things not living in New York than it is living in New York.
That's interesting. So when you decided to leave New York and you moved to Zurich then?
Yes, that's correct.
So how did that conversation go with the wife? Well, darling, we're going to Zurich. I mean,
I have an amazing wife, and you know, I need to tell her that I love her in front of as many people as possible. So I hope you don't mind, Stephen Laurie. I love you very, very much. I'm so lucky to be married to you.
That's one more listener. Great.
And all of her friends in Mexico, and she grew up in Mexico. But Laurie's an adventuresome type. I mean, she came to New York age 21. I met her on the second day that she was in New York. And she was up for the adventure. And
how did you meet?
Laurie and I met through mutual friends. I like to say we met at a bar, but that's not entirely accurate. We met through mutual friends, but friends of mine that she'd met the day before, actually, in New York. And it was her birthday. When and this guy said, well, it's your birthday, I'll take you for dinner and I'll call up a friend and see if he's free. And I actually brought a date with me.
How funny.
So, but no, she I was talking to her about the desire to move, and it was also driven in part because the situation with children and schools in New York City is complicated, and we didn't understand how to play the game. And I think that if we had not moved to Zurich, and if we'd have stayed in New York City, for example, we might have moved to a place like Park Slope, or just a more Westchester County, or a place that was more reasonable to have children. So, but she was totally up for it, and she's an adventuresome type. I feel very grateful and lucky for that. We've been on many adventures as a family together. But
that's quite cool. I mean, that I could have that conversation. But anyway, let's go back to your career, because I was interested. Reading your book, your first job was at William Blair, an institution which you clearly didn't like, and an experience you clearly didn't enjoy. And you left there without having another job, right? Do you want to just very briefly just tell us about the circumstances? Because I think there's quite a lot of lessons to learn from that. Yeah,
it's so many. And just to be clear, William Blair is a highly reputable smaller brokerage firm that may still be around, and we must make sure that all the folks at William Blair, you guys are great. So let's just be clear. We're talking about a firm that is, I don't think, anymore in existence, and it's called D.H. Blair. And there's no problem with you doing that, because, Stephen, that is a very, very important point. What these bucket shops do is that they want to play off the perception that there's something else. So they would name themselves, they would take the name of a well-known firm, and, instead of calling themselves Goldman Sachs, they'd call themselves Geldman Sachs. Believe it or not, that there would be people who'd be duped by that. And it's just kind of insane. And in a certain way, you made the exact mistake that the people at D.H. Blair wanted you to make.
Well, what I did was, when I was writing up my notes, I've got a friend at William Blair,
right?
And we're meant to be meeting up for a drink, and obviously that was in my mind as I was writing the notes. So my profuse apologies to William Blair.
Yeah,
but might even become clients. So,
but it makes a really, really important point that a friend and I have played around with. So the mind creates positive associations. It's not very good at creating negative associations. So we kind of like toyed with the idea of writing on one of our Wikipedia pages, Guy Spier has never worked for George Soros. And it doesn't matter that there's a negative there, because in the human mind, most human minds will make a positive association there. So D.H. Blair is a sort of like, I wouldn't say carbon copy. Wolf of Wall Street, if anybody here has watched the movie, I'm sure most people have, is a sort of an exaggeration of what happened at D.H. Blair, and extraordinary misjudgment on my part and lack of judgment at age 27. So you'd think that I was, that's getting a little late in the game to start to be making really big career mistakes, and I would call that a really big career mistake. And if you want to, I've thought long and hard about what were the circumstances that came together to make such a big career mistake. But yes, I went to work at a Wolf of Wall Street type place, in which the people at the firm, many of them did not have university degrees. A small number who did. It was run by a guy who was actually a Harvard Business School graduate who owned the firm, extremely smart and aggressive in his interpretation of the rules. And the whole firm was of the mindset that the marketplace and the participants in the marketplace are a resource to be exploited by playing fast and loose with the rules and being highly aggressive and burning relationships. And what's amazing is that that is a strategy for life. It works, actually. And there were people who made significant amounts of money there. I think it doesn't allow you to become Warren Buffett wealthy, but it allows people who might have had jobs running a car mechanic workshop, or maybe even drug dealers, or whatever it was that they were doing with maybe just a high school certificate, to make far more money than they could have ever expected to make, just like the people at Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by finance, and one of the reasons why I made the mistake is the guy gave me the title of vice president, and he said, you'll be doing deals from day one. And that kind of appealed to me. And I can remember telling friends of mine that I was going to be vice president in an investment bank. And that, in this sort of outer scorecard world of Harvard Business School at the time, there were some who were kind of struck with envy with that, And instead of investing in myself and investing in relationships with people that I could build for the long term, I was going for this stupid external scorecard stuff. But the lessons, as you say, are profound and deep, because I think that I saw in microcosm and in extreme ways patterns that repeat themselves time and again all over Wall Street. And so I have these debates with my father about whether it was a good idea to go there, and he thinks it was. I still think it was a terrible idea. There were other ways to learn those lessons. And the worst part is that I really did have a reputational hole to fill. And I think that the younger you are when you make reputational mistakes, the better. People will give you the benefit of the doubt. But the older you are when you make them, the more time it's going to take for people to really kind of like start trusting you.